So Nigeria and Afghanistan, possibly the two most corrupt countries.
But this particular president is actually not corrupt.
I'm not going to demand any apology from anybody. What I'm demanding is the return of assets.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
The intellectual capacity of the president is protozoan.
Can you really lay out the red carpet for someone who has talked about grabbing women by the
I think about a man who thinks it's okay to go and grab.
Tout le monde nous disait que c'était impossible.
Everyone said it was impossible.
Mais ils ne connaissaient pas la France.
They didn't know France.
When the Supreme Court of Kenya annulled the presidential election held in August, it was to many a confusion of excitement as well as anxiety. While it was unprecedented in Africa, where the judiciary is often perceived as an appendage of the executive, the Kenya election had gulped a whopping $500 million, making it the most expensive election in the world, coming only after the United States on a cost-per-voter basis. Now, the future of the biggest economy in East Africa is a bit uncertain, as a rerun election is most likely going to impact negatively on the country's economy. On Global Arena this week, we're taking a look at the Kenya presidential election and the lessons for democracy in Africa. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back. Now, Kenya's Supreme Court has declared Uhuru Kenyatta's victory in the presidential election held in August invalid and ordered a new vote to be held within 60 days. The six-judge bench ruled 4-2 in favor of a petition filed by Odinga, who claimed the electronic voting results were hacked and manipulated in favor of the incumbent.
Now, having heard from both sides, I want to read the declaration is hereby issued that the third respondent was not validly declared as the president-elect, and that the declaration is invalid, null, and void. Third, an order is hereby issued directing the first respondent to organize and conduct a fresh presidential election in strict conformity with the Constitution and the applicable election laws within 60 days of the determination under Article 143 of the Constitution.
The decision to nullify the result sets up a new race for the presidency between incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta and the veteran opposition leader Raila Odinga. While Odinga celebrates the court decision, calling it an exceptional example for all Africa, President Kenyatta says it's a situation where 6 people had gone against the will of the people.
I personally disagree with the ruling that has been made today. But I respect it as much as I disagree with it. I respect it. I disagree with it because, as I have said, millions of Kenyans queued, made their choice, and 6 people have decided that they will go against the will of the people.
Decision is precedent setting. It will reverberate across Kenya, the African continent, and the rest of the world through generations to come. Never again will impunity reign in Kenya. It is now clear that no one in Kenya is above the law. A new Kenya has been born by this ruling. And Kenya is once again leading Africa, as it so often does, with its vibrant democracy, except at election time.
Meanwhile, former President Olusegun Obasanjo and 5 of his counterparts in Africa have called for peace and fairness in the presidential rerun election coming up next month in Kenya. The other leaders are Ghana's John Kufuor, Gotemba Monge of Botswana, Tanzania's Benjamin William Mkapa, Tunisia's Mohamed Monsef Mazoki, and Kigalema Petrus Muntale of South Africa. In a joint statement by the 6 former presidents entitled Kenya, A Plea for Peace, they described the August 8, 2017 election and its subsequent annulment on September the 1st as a watershed in the history of the East African country. They noted that events ordinarily seem innocuous, but anyone conversant with the realities on the ground in Kenya would be concerned. Hence the need to call for peace in the build-up to the repetition of the presidential elections in less than 60 days, as well as immediately after. To shed more light on the development in Kenya, I spoke with a political scientist and lawyer, Dr.Babafemi Badijo, who prior to his role as head of political affairs at the UN mission in Liberia, served as Deputy Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Somalia. Badijo was resident in Kenya for over a decade, working on Somalia from Nairobi. He played primary role in the design, negotiation, and implementation of the Djibouti initiative that set up national governance structures for Somalia after a decade of civil strife. He also organized and participated in peace accord negotiations among Somali leaders that resulted in the Nairobi Declaration of March 1994. He is the author of the book Raila Odinga, An Enigma in Kenya Politics, a book that tells the story of politics in Kenya and Raila's role in them. It's been described by critics as a marvelous abridged version of Kenya political history over the last 60 years and an excellent introduction for the uninitiated to the complex landscape of Kenyan politics. Dr. Femi Badijo, thank you so much for joining us at Global Arena.
No, you're very welcome.
Let's begin from 1964, when the Republic of Kenya was formed. Jomo Kenyatta and Oginga Odinga were the first president and vice president, respectively. 44 years after, their children, Uhuru Kenyatta, as well as Raila Odinga, became prime minister and deputy prime minister in a power-sharing arrangement after the 2007 election crisis. Fast forward to 2017. In a couple of weeks now, in October, the same names, Kenyatta and Odinga, are going to be on the polling booth for the rerun presidential election. In your opinion, what makes this name still relevant in the Kenyan politics?
That stuff, one has to look at the decolonization struggle in Kenya in order to understand the different roles that those two founding fathers that you mentioned played. And immediately after independence, they are falling out over differences of opinion, differences of position on how the country should be run along the ideological issues of those days, simmered down into ethnicity. And the division between the Luos and the Kikuyus could be traced back to the differences between these two personalities, because these two personalities collaborated. The British even wanted to offer Oginga Odinga the leadership of the country while they were keeping Kenyatta away in jail. But Oginga Odinga insisted that my leader has to be here. But of course, the rest is history.
But then there are some who would even say that years after, that this continued struggle to hold power between Kenyatta and Odinga is a continuation of the feud between their forefathers. How relevant is that now?
Well, I wouldn't put it exactly that way, because there has been quite a lot of collaboration towards changing the governance arrangement in Kenya. Raila and his father were in the strong push against President Moi's one-party rule.
Okay.
And that struggle together was not an ethnic struggle. It was the struggle that the Kenyans called the Second Liberation of Kenya.
Okay.
And it brought several people, some even from the Kikuyu side of the house, to join hands because Kibaki himself, Matiba, all these people were Kikuyus who were on the forefront with Oginga Odinga and Raila Odinga inheriting that mantle and time in jail in order to ensure that second liberation that ended up taking place, with President Moi agreeing that, okay, we'll do multi-party system.
Jomo Kenyatta died in office in 1978 after spending 14 years. He was succeeded by his vice president, Daniel Arap Moi, who spent 24 years in office. Moi, on the other hand, was succeeded by Kibaki, who had served as vice president under Moi for 10 years. Now, the main political figures in Kenya, as we speak now, haven't changed much since 1960. Some would say it's the African thing to want to hold them to power. What do you think is responsible for that?
Well, again, you have immediately mentioned the question of the sit-tight syndrome in African politics. A number of structural efforts are being made to change some of that. Some of the struggles of Raila Odinga that I spoke about earlier on towards multipartyism, that means you could have a choice at least, towards a new constitution for Kenya, which equally meant that you have a limited term of office. Of course, don't forget the fact that African leaders very easily changed that later. Quite a number of them have been doing that. But so far, some of those structural issues have started to kick in. Moi himself would have continued if he wasn't constrained that he had to go. And he's going, bringing in Kibaki.
Let's talk about the main figures in this rerun election. Raila Odinga, you wrote a whole book on him, an enigma of the Kenya politics. His father led the opposition for close to 28 years, never became president. At 72 years, the August election was perhaps Raila's fourth attempt at running for presidency, and he even vowed to serve for only a term if he won. Would you say this is Raila's last chance? And what's your opinion about his chances of winning this rerun?
I don't want to respond as somebody who was involved a little in that election, because I did spend some time in Kenya in July of this year. But as a scholar, Raila was not having a chance of running again because the Constitution had fixed that wasn't going to be. So he has to hand over to one of the people that they formed a coalition together.
Okay.
Now, the problem of the media is being highlighted in the social media because for some reason the regular media started talking about Uhuru had won. Where even today I was listening to Al Jazeera and was surprised that Al Jazeera was saying President Uhuru Kenyatta spoke to Parliament, he won the last election. How can you say he won when Supreme Court of the country has said that it is null and void? That meant that there was no presidential election. So how does one win what didn't take place? Because anything that rests on nothing cannot stand, it must fall. Now, we should wait for the judgment of the Supreme Court, which should be issued very soon because the they indicated that it would be within 21 days.
Explanation for why.
Yes, how they arrived at the conclusion that they did, that majority of 2/3, how they arrived at their conclusion. We should wait for that. I know some of that from the pleadings of Raila, and some of that is in the public space. But to start talking about all that now is over. Everybody, the Supreme Court audited the process, and there are claims that 5 million votes were unaccounted for. So how do you decide that Raila did not win, that Uhuru won in that sort of a situation? I don't even want to talk about the fact that there are internal problems now being discussed within the independent, so-called independent Election and Boundaries Commission as to how a username and password was created for the chairman of the IEBC, which was used to alter figures 9,800 plus times. And then you are talking about, we should be happy that the Supreme Court of Kenya did not behave like other courts in Africa that normally would have rushed everything under the ground and say, well, the incumbent continues, there is nothing. All those, we blame the sit-tight president. No, we should not blame sit-tight leaders. We should blame ourselves, whether as voters, people, the judiciary. There are times on this continent where the crowd had reacted, like in some of the cases in Europe. The first reaction was in Sudan. When the people got on the street, the general decided, no, I have to go.
You know, as a journalist, I'm more concerned about the ability and capacity of Raila to rule as president. He reminds me of someone like the Nigerian president, who is also a septuagenarian. Raila is 72 years, a very historic man. He's been with close to 9 political parties, spent the highest number of years in jail as a politician. Do you think that he still has the energy to rule as Kenya president?
Well, the only thing that could be easily done is to empirically deal with this issue. You see President Obasanjo, as a former president, is now officially 80, but definitely he never knew when he was exactly born. His contemporaries are in the range of 82 to 86. He's still dashing around like a young man, even faster than many.
Maybe he would have aged more quickly if he was still in power.
It's not an easy calculus that, okay, because this one is this. And in leadership, it is not how much of a running you are doing. It is how strategic you are. Because you are not supposed to be the one to go and check that they have installed the number of megawatts in a particular place. That's why you have ministers. If you are strategic in the appointment of your ministers, if you are strategic in the vision that you give to the country, then you are able to steer things like a pilot in the air. And Raila is, from close quarters, still much stronger than what we are talking about, and for some reason it appears that President Buhari in his own case is bouncing back fairly well compared to when he left.
There were fears for Kenya's foreign relations prior to the election of Uhuru Kenyatta, given the fact that both him and William Ruto, as at that time, were inductees at the International Criminal Court. How would you say that foreign relations has fared in the past 4 years under Kenyatta's administration?
Well, now I think that we can spend a whole day in trying to understand foreign relations. The problem of foreign relations is a very clear case of, you can be my enemy today and you are my friend tomorrow when my objective interests are involved. So it is for you to be asking yourself, what are the interests of the West? Is it democracy that they deceive us and talk about democracy every day? Or is it how much they can corner from the rest of the world in order to continue the development of their own societies? The inflow that is taking place more to China these days in terms of a newcomer on the scene. So in terms of all the stories about The Hague, you know yourself what happened with respect to that. Bensouda, the prosecutor, had to give up. What do you call it? Many of the people who were to give evidence had died, and quite a number of them had been declared missing, cannot be found, and some have said that they don't even remember whatever happened anymore. So it was not possible to continue with the case. But really, a different level of the issue is that court important to the West? Yes, some of them subscribe to it, but the United States did not subscribe to that court. So the appearance of wanting to, I don't share some of the excitement that people have on some of these Western control arrangements that we easily are in, and continue to see the relationships as one between equals and friends and whatever. That's not the case.
But it appears the world eventually welcomed and accepted Kenyatta. Obama eventually visited Kenya before he left office. Would you say that's the case now?
I think that right now, the relationship between the United States and Kenya is, I would say, good. It could be better because I'm not sure that Trump pays attention to whatever is happening at the level of diplomats talking to themselves, not the level of capital. American capital is nobody is hampering it. So, and that's what is prime for Trump. But you can see so many months after he became president, he is yet to appoint Assistant Secretary of State for Africa. So that tells you about relationship with the whole of Africa, not just Kenya, Nigeria, wherever you are talking about. In as much as nobody is disrupting capital, it couldn't be bothered. So I don't think that these issues of The Hague or whatever, or even the elections is, once we can be sure that there is the stability without talking about justice, without talking about anything else. Once there is stability, let's rush everything away and move on.
Let's talk about the moral eligibility of the candidates in Kenya. Both Kenyatta and Odinga played prominent roles in the 2007 election, which deteriorated into a nationwide ethnic violence. There are different data, but some would say over 1,000 Kenyans lost their life, over 250,000 were displaced. Odinga also considered in your book that he played a central role in the 1982 Kenya coup. How come...
You are misquoting my book.
Okay, please correct me.
He did not concede that he played a role in the 1982 coup. I said that I am almost convinced that he did, and I indicated all the facts. Yes, the facts as I saw them. But the 1982 coup took place in a different epoch in African history, in a different epoch when nobody would have reacted the way we are reacting today on anybody that is wanting to push out a dictator. So I don't want to go back into the question of dealing with...
But how come two individuals who were, relevant in an election where over 1,000 people died, are still very much relevant in the Kenya politics, and people are also ready to vote for them?
Well, the way you have put it, I'm not sure that that is, we cannot just pack everybody together and make a judgment. Raila was not invited to the ICC. That meant that the international system set up in that investigated and found out that he wasn't involved in any of that. Yeah, and we all know who were actually invited. And then things happened and nothing could happen.
And that's the much we can bring to you this week on Global Arena. We'll be back next week, God willing, with the concluding part of that interview. The conversation, however, continues on all of our social media platforms. Until then, keep supporting a peaceful, integrated, and prosperous Africa. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Thanks for being there.
Nigeria and Afghanistan, possibly the two most corrupt countries.
This particular president is actually not corrupt.
I'm not going to demand any apology from anybody. What I'm demanding is the return of assets.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
The intellectual capacity of the president is protozoan.
Can you really lay out the red carpet for someone who has talked about grabbing women by the...
I think about a man who thinks it's okay to go and grab...
Tout le monde nous disait que c'était impossible.
Everyone said it was impossible.
Mais ils ne connaissaient pas la France.
They didn't know France.
The Kenyan Supreme Court has now given reasons why it invalidated the re-election of President Uhuru Kenyatta, saying the Electoral Commission failed to verify results and there was evidence of irregularities and illegalities in the vote counting. There was, however, an uneasy calm in Kenya as the country counts down to the October 26 rerun presidential election amidst protest by the opposition calling for the resignation as well as prosecution of top officials of the Electoral Commission. On Global Arena this week, we're turning our attention back to the Kenya presidential election and the matters arising. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back. The Kenyan police has dispersed protesters in front of the Electoral Commission office as controversy continued over who should conduct the fresh presidential election. Police shot tear gas after shoving broke out between opposition supporters who demanded the resignation of top officials of the Electoral Commission and ruling party supporters who want no change to the electoral body.
As long as Chiloba is still in office, NASA is still going to ensure that we have more of these protests, peaceful protests, to come here at the IBC and push for the resignation of Chiloba in the 11th office.
The opposition coalition's parliamentary group charged in a statement that members of an outlawed gang had been brought to the demonstration to cause chaos and harm opposition leaders. According to top NASA leaders, their security was withdrawn just hours before their planned demonstrations at the Electoral Commission headquarters in Nairobi.
We are equally dismayed by the decision by Jubilee to withdraw the security detail assigned to our presidential candidate, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, and his running mate, His Excellency Honorable Kalonzo Musyoka.
We're joined now by political scientist and lawyer Dr.Babafemi Badejo, who for almost 2.5 decades served the United Nations in Somalia, Kenya, Liberia, Guinea-Bissau, and Sudan. He is the author of Raila Odinga, an enigma in Kenyan politics. In this concluding interview, he sheds more light on the developments in Kenya. Let's begin to talk about the landmark Supreme Court decision for a continent known for sit-tight leadership, where the judiciary is even often perceived as an appendage of the executive. No one would have correctly predicted the decision of the Supreme Court. But do you think that this will have a ripple effect on the continent as being postulated by many?
Oh, I have no doubt in my mind that even the Americans are jealous that at least they can learn something from Africa. It's not a question of just drive everything under the carpet, maintain the economy, ensure that Wall Street does not fritter in challenging. You can look at the history of how Al Gore was pushed aside and everybody said just quickly accept. You can come to how Hillary was pressured into say it that you accept, you know. Now, here is somebody that they all descended on. Obama, all of them descended on him, and the guy said, this is not fair. You guys have been talking about rule of law, you know, and he initially said he wasn't going to go to court because of what you said. He had been through it before. You know, he won clearly in 2007. What happened? They quickly went to swear Kibaki in overnight. Then the Constitution says you cannot swear in that way, or else Uhuru would have been sworn in by now. And then you start talking about... so I do hope that the judgment... we must be fair. Judges in our country have made some significant efforts, but none has gone as far as dealing with a presidential level. That's why Kenya has beaten us to it, and we must gladly look at that jurisprudence and see how the judges can really be independent and not be looking for what money they can get into their bank accounts, as has been many of the cases here.
But how realistic is Nigeria duplicating this? Consider the speed. This election was held on the 8th of August. The Supreme Court started hearing, I think it was on 28th of August. The 1st of September, they had a verdict. How can we duplicate that in Nigeria?
You see, that's what I was saying about the fundamental role in my book. I spoke about the fact that there are only 5 people who have made a difference in that country. And Raila is a strong one amongst those 5. Raila was one of those who pushed for a new constitution, which they got in 2010. And that constitution details the steps. You know, if the election is not challenged, within 14 days, the new president is to be sworn in. If the election is challenged, the court will have to give its ruling by this time.
The AU mission led by Thabo Mbeki, John Kerry was there, headed the Carter Center mission. The former president of Ghana, John Mahama, the EU observer, had excellent things to say about the election. But it looked as if all of them couldn't have lied. It appears like what happened at the point of coalition and what Raila calls internet fraud. What attention do you see Africa paying? Because if Kenya could have spent over $500 million in an election and just at the point of coalition or collision, something goes wrong, what lessons are there?
Let me start by saying that I have a lot of respect for Thabo Mbeki. Somebody who has been involved in the struggle for liberation in his country and led his country very, very well. And he is one of our respected elder statesmen. But people make mistakes. You know, perhaps he may need to say clearly to the world that he never thought that hacking had left America for Kenya. After all, it was in the US that they are now crying about did Russia hack or it did not hack, and committees set up on that and what have you. The EU election observers are now saying, well, there were too many companies that were involved and we couldn't have seen some of what those companies did. Why come to talk when you could not have seen? Thabo Mbeki said he did not have a mandate to investigate. It is true. You don't have a mandate to investigate, but you could then have put that on the table that, yes, the people lined up and we saw everything, but we cannot say anything about the transmission.
According to Thabo Mbeki, he commended the Kenyan people on conducting the election in a peaceful environment. John Kerry says the Kenyan people, he also commended the Kenyan people in conducting the election peacefully. John Mahama, who chaired the Commonwealth Observer Group, says the Kenyan elections across 6 levels of government has been credible, fair, and inconclusive. The EU observer took it to another level by commending the role of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission.
Actually, all of them commended the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. You just picked different aspects. Thabo Mbeki's AU Commission even issued a statement on August 14, well after everybody had come to the conclusion that we want stability, not justice, not peace. And so the best thing is this Raila is a perennial, so let's just move on. So coming from that orientation, and what the main lesson is, do we need international election observers? Myself and a Ghanaian friend are just putting something together on that. That it's a waste that people go in. Of course, every election teaches new things. If they had thought about Nigeria's 1983 election, when it was landslide, I was, commentator for that elections on Radio Lagos. We saw the crowds, we went around, we saw everything, and then at the end of the day, Ofonagoro, on using the NTA, manipulated everything at the collation center, and they won landslide. So what has Kenya done? The IEBC in Kenya has only rendered what Ofonagoro did in 1983 that brought the Buhari coup, if you cast your mind back to that, just using technology now that, yes, you can collate at the different centers. That's your problem.
But don't you think, you mentioned international observers earlier, don't you think the absence of international observers would inspire impunity if there's nobody watching?
Now, the question, I can ask you many questions. Tell me any election in which it is international observers that has made any difference. Is it in Gambia? Or is it in Nigeria? It is the people who must protect their own votes. So if you support civil society to be vociferous, the most crucial thing is finding people of integrity to be heads of national election commissions. People of integrity. It is not the number of international observers who pretend to know what is going on. After 2007, they decided that they must stay in country long before, during, and after. They did that in Kenya. But none of them spoke about Chris Msando, the guy in charge of the ICT that was killed on the eve of the elections. None of them tried to even address the mind into a possibility. I'm not saying that he was killed by the people, but the opposition side is claiming that they cut his hand in order to use his finger, and that finger had rotted by the time election took place. It was not possible to now stop the process. So even after they had declared the president, results kept coming in.
Let's also look at the position of Raila Odinga. He has threatened now to boycott the rerun election if there are no legal and constitutional guarantees. He wants the Electoral Commission to audit the technology used to conduct August election. and give some sort of assurance that it will be transparent. Is he asking for something that is not measurable? How do we measure that this has taken place?
Well, I hope that the Kenyans can meet among themselves and dialogue on how best to assuage all feelings, including that of President Uhuru Kenyatta. Because even today in Parliament, he still said that he respects the Supreme Court, but he disagrees with them. He called the judges all sorts of names, after initially stating that...
But he preached peace, and many people also feel that Raila is not only the hero in this election. Kenyatta also played a prominent role by telling them that your neighbors will remain your neighbors. Ensure that I don't agree with the judgment, but I have to succumb to the law. Wouldn't you celebrate him for that?
No, I will celebrate him for that if he had stopped at that. That was the very first statement he made as the decision was made. Go on YouTube and listen to subsequent statements he made.
He only said that 6 people have overturned the will of majority of the people.
No, they were not left to him. It's actually 4 because 2 supported him. So it is 4 people. And what did he call those 4? You tell me now. No, what did he call them? Thugs, crooks. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the country.
He must have said that in Kenyan language.
No. Go and re-listen to Al Jazeera, the second statement after the court decision. I heard it with myself. Then he said quite a number in YouTube when he was talking to the Kenyan, his party's governors, elect senators, and whatever and what have you.
So he was quoted to have said recently that the Jubilee Party has majority at the parliament, and that even if Odinga wins, he will be impeached in 2 or 3 months. Is that also possible?
That would be democracy. That would be democracy. If Odinga gets there and he cannot hold the place together and whatever, and he's impeached, his vice president would take over. If what you are saying, because I didn't listen to this, if what you are saying he said is the truth, that's great. If the spirit is we can share power, not that power must rest in one place. If the spirit is there, if Raila, it's not that Raila is not Kenya.
Unlike him, Raila says he's not ready to share power this time. Not like what happened in 2008.
But you didn't listen to the context. You didn't listen to the context. As they were in court, there were overtures that the opposition claimed. I don't know if it is fake news, because Donald Trump has now taught us that you guys, but there were said to be overtures that, look, instead of going through all this in court, let's sit together as brothers and have a government of national unity. That's what he said he was not going to be part of. And if you are in his shoes, you thought you won election in 2007, the whole world forced you into being prime minister to somebody who lost, in your view, and perhaps possible to be documented. The same thing repeated in 2017, and then it's whatever. So you have to put these things into context. Is Uhuru wanting to share power as Raila as president and he prime minister? Of course, there is even no prime minister in their current constitution. But let's say that they can work it out like Kofi Annan and Kufuor worked it out, and Adeniji worked it out the last time around, Ambassador Adeniji. Is that what he's saying? Or he's saying, I will be on top? Let's repeat 2007. I think the people should be allowed to decide. The people of Kenya should be allowed to decide in a transparent, credible elections.
So we have a press release here signed by 6 former presidents of Africa: Nigeria, Tunisia, Ghana, Tanzania, Botswana, and South Africa. And they're calling for peace. I'm sure that the and not forgetting in a hurry what transpired in 2007, 2008 in Kenya. Beyond the press release, what do you expect government to do, and even the African continent to do at this time, to ensure that these rural elections do not end up in violence?
Well, there is nothing that would be as good as transparency. Whatever, and I think the African elder statesmen called attention to that. They called for support to the IEBC to ensure that it transmits exactly the will of the Kenyan people. If that is transparently seen by everybody, people will accept the outcome. If the outcome is that Raila has lost, I see no reason why his people will not say, let's go and prepare for next election. If transparently it is shown that Uhuru has lost, and he makes the kind of speech that you are telling me now, why would people go on the streets to kill themselves? But when it is all hushed in secrecy, when electoral observers who I think are no longer necessary, because in spite of the money spent to bring them to Kenya, so many people still lost their lives. A 10-year-old girl on the balcony of her parents' house shot. You know, I'm sure stray bullets. Not that they wanted to kill a 10-year-old. But should we be sponsoring some people to go on safari in order to say, well, that is what we saw then. Whatever the case is, we have said our own. Let them go and handle. Why don't we support them to handle their own affairs very well, empower their civil society, have the world cry on the IEBC if it is looking like it's not being transparent? The argument that myself and a Ghanaian friend are making is that if Mbeki, Mahama, Kerry, the EU, whatever, had hedged their bets, had listened closely to the cry of the opposition that how is it possible that one candidate is like 11% in almost everywhere above the other one? Is this not an algorithm problem, as you guys of today who know technology calls it in? You know, that is enough. Because initially the chairman of the commission said, Kenya, be rest assured, I will not declare any presidential candidate until I have seen all the forms, until the forms 34A and 34B have been accounted for. Let's even forget about all the manipulation that took place with those ones but out of 40,000, it was clear that they hadn't even seen over 10,000 from all that was tabled before the court. If they hadn't the courage that those international electoral observers had given them, he would have been more careful. He wouldn't have jumped the gun to move on as he did. That who cares? The whole world is here. The whole of Africa. What is he going to do? You know, Africa has spoken. America, even that we thought supporting him, has spoken. The Europeans, all of them, they have endorsed what I have done. So what is stopping me?
What do you expect to happen? Do you expect this to all end peacefully?
I told you that I am worried, but I'm happy that African elder statesmen who are much more well connected are equally worried, as evident in the statement they just made, and that perhaps it would be possible to provide the necessary level of support to IEBC before October 17 to ensure that the computer process is not in secrecy, that designated people from all sides can have access and see those results as they are streaming in, and the media focused on the streaming in into the computer itself, not on the basis of an algorithm that is just fixed, but genuine coming in and collation. I think those are the things that can be done to save lives. If everything is seen to be transparent, it should be fine.
What lessons are here for the African continent?
I think the main thing is don't make don't elect anybody into electoral commissions with dark spots in their past. We are now hearing some of the ones here after the putting in place of the new chairman, and claims that there had been things in the past. That's not good enough, because you get easily compromised. But if you can be as bold as Jega with your commission and say, you can say whatever you like, we will say it exactly on the basis of what we have seen. And this is not Nigeria, Gambia. The guy in Gambia was very bold at the point of being killed. He had to disappear into one of the embassies there for protection. You know, if we empower civil society in Africa to be more up to guarding their results and not waiting for people who are going to come from Europe and America. How many elections do we go to certify in Europe and America that we think that the solution to our problems is to go bring a Muzungu or an Oyibo man that comes all over the place and says, as far as I can see, everything is perfect and whatever. And then we say, oh yes, after all, it's what fella called Kolo mentality. Nothing other than that.
Dr. Femi Badijo, thank you so much for joining us on Global Arena. And that wraps it this week on Global Arena. The conversation, however, continues on all of our social media handles. You can send your email to galaxytelevision@gmail.com. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Thanks for being there.